People are not born equal. That is the hard truth I learned at age 4. Like me too in real life, age 4 was like when I gained cognizance. It was, ooh man, that was a weird time. YouTube, with my preamble video out of the way, we can start this analysis off proper. The plot, the characters, the themes, we'll be getting to all of them. I could start this video off by giving you sales numbers or talk about how it's had 3 movies with such and such earnings, but I don't care about any of that, and I'm sure you probably don't either. My Hero Academia has gotten quite large, and it 100% slots into the place left by such series as Naruto and Bleach. Not One Piece though, no, that's... One Piece hit Dragon Ball status, they're never letting that go. Even when the manga ends, the anime is not letting that go, so you don't have to worry about that. Whether you like it or not will be a completely different issue, but we're not here to talk about One Piece. To me, My Hero Academia is something special because it hits that right spot of what I really want in a series. It's so straightforward that I find it endearing. It wasn't something that I noticed when I first started reading this series, but over the years, I've become a lot less receptive to large lasting plot hooks and formless mysteries. Not to say that this story doesn't have its own share of plot hooks, it obviously does. That's what my last video was about. This series focuses on the one thing that I think most people are inherently receptive to, and that is the characters. It's not the things that are revealed, but how the characters act when they are revealed and what they do and how they handle them that is interesting. But that's just my opinion. But that's also kind of the point of this video, right? To give my formed opinion on what I think of the story with my own preferences, hoping you can at least see where I'm coming from. There's no set number on how many videos this might take up, and my start and stop points are wherever I feel like putting them. This video will be going from, obviously the start, up until the end of the USJ attack, so we'll be going from chapter 1 to 21. Once more, people are not born equal. This is the origin of My Hero Academia. One day, a bioluminescent baby was born, and soon after, superpowered individuals started popping up all over the world. The cause was unknown, but over time, this phenomenon spread to 80% of the world's population. Fantasy became reality, and superpowers are the norm. That means superpowered crime is also the norm, and a comic book pastime only dreamed about has become an idolized profession. Right away, the story goes to show us the normal everyday of a city in Japan. A giant villain is rampaging around the train station. Why? He got cornered while purse snatching. People come and gawk while others have to call into work and explain why they'll be late. This scene perfectly shows how mundane and normal all of this is, but our protagonist, Midoriya Izuku, shows us how exciting this monotony can still be. Obviously, more people come and gawk, it's like watching a fire be put out in real life, but this boy's enthusiasm seems to take it to another level. And with the villain being taken care of by a new hero, the story gives us a light rundown on how they came to be and operate. With the rise of superpowered crime, countries were too slow to act, so the people took the law into their own hands, and after a while, with the support of the people, being a hero became a government profession tied to fame and glory. Midoriya feverishly takes notes on what he just saw, and is asked if he wants to be a hero by a stranger, and he says yes with a bright smile. We change scenes to his middle school where his teacher is planning to pass out career forms, but tosses them aside because it seems the dream to be a hero is in the hearts of most children. But one child seems to be more eager than the others. Bakugo Katsuki arrogantly yells how he will take UA's entrance exam, the top hero school in the nation, and how he will surpass even the best hero, All Might. The teacher then tells us how Midoriya also wants to enroll, which gets the class to start laughing at him. Because as Bakugo reveals, Midoriya doesn't have a special ability. He doesn't have a quirk. The bright boy we saw before becomes withdrawn and skittish, and with good reason, as we see how Bakugo, the boy from the first page, still terrorizes and intimidates him. After class, Bakugo hadn't had enough and decides to try and put Midoriya in his place. He destroys his hero notes and tells him to take a jump off the roof to get his quirk in its next life. Man, that's aggressive. Midoriya doesn't have a comeback to a physical display of intimidation, and he just runs off to get his book back. Now we have the normal of our protagonist, a boy with dreams of grandeur that are denied by the people around him. This gets further reinforced by a flashback that gives us more context to the boy's dreams and mentality. Inspired by a hero who managed to save over 100 people in 10 minutes, he's devastated to find out that he will never attain a quirk himself, and even more broken that no one believes in his dream. But as we cut back to the present, we see that Midoriya still holds on to his dream, but it might be cut short as he's attacked by a sludge-like villain that was foreshadowed a few pages ago. As he's suffocating, he's saved by a man that's been alluded to for the past handful of pages, the #1 hero, All Might. After waking up, Midoriya is surprised to meet his own personal hero, even going as far as noticing how he's even drawn differently. Midoriya does his best to ask All Might that even if he doesn't have a quirk of his own, can he be a hero who saves everyone with a smile just like he does? And the boy finds out the shocking truth. The #1 hero is a shell of his former self who can only work for a few hours a day. He smiles to ward off his own fear. As the symbol of peace, as a pro-hero, he can't in good faith tell Midoriya that he can be a hero without a quirk, telling him that police work is just as noble and to face reality. Secrets are revealed to remove this world's sense of normalcy. This boy's dream was rejected by his own personal hero. The glitz and glamour has already been stripped away, and only the painful reality underneath is left to sting. In short, everything that's been set up is a lie. Or is it? Unknown to the two of them, All Might dropped the villain he defeated and captured, and it has taken control of Bakugo, and it starts a rampage around the city, wanting to take revenge on All Might himself. All of the heroes that we saw at the start of this story are no match for the combination of sludge and explosions, and one-lane roads, so they all do their best to mitigate the damage while they wait for someone with a compatible quirk to come and save the day. All Might arrives and is forced to do the same, cursing his own mistake. And Midoriya, while wandering the streets and trying to face the reality he was aware of and tried to ignore, he stumbles across the scene out of habit, also shocked and hoping for a hero to come like the smiling masses hoping for a chance to catch a glimpse of All Might. It's only when Bakugo has enough strength to turn around and when Midoriya sees the eyes of the victim does his body move without any extra thought. At the shock of every hero there, the boy rushes headfirst into danger, and thinking on his feet, he's able to get close enough to try and claw away at the sludge covering his childhood friend. Getting enough away for Bakugo to take a breath and ask why. Out of all the answers that ran through his head, he could only smile and say that it looked like the boy was asking for help. But his effort isn't enough to stop the villain from retaliating, but it was more than enough to get All Might to step in and live up to his own words. A pro should always be willing to put his life on the line. And with the Detroit Smash, he punches hard enough to scatter the sludge into the air and have it fall back down along with the rain he created with the upward thrust. After all is said and done and Bakugo and Midoriya are praised and scolded respectively, the blonde-haired boy just has to get the last word in, even if he talks around what he really should have been saying. Finally ready to give up on his dream, Midoriya is stopped once again by All Might. The pro is here to thank him and revise what he said, and give him a proposal. But for now, he tells Midoriya the words he's always wanted to hear since he was 4 years old. He can be a hero. And so starts the story of how Midoriya Izuku will be the greatest hero. I had to get really thorough for this first chapter. Whenever I look back on this chapter, I'm always impressed by how jammed-packed it is. The page count is pretty standard for a starting chapter, but this one manages to feel so detailed. I was a little surprised that the anime split it into 2 episodes, but they managed to have just enough to stretch out with how dense it is. We get to see this world's normal, and how Midoriya's preconceived notions are all shattered by the appearance of All Might, at first for worse, and then at the end for the best. Even a pretty simple bully like Bakugo gets to be fleshed out, from a brat who throws hands carelessly to a jerk who throws around words carelessly, but he's aware enough to understand what really happened with his rescue, like All Might explains, and is extremely upset about it. This first chapter shows 3 important characters at some of their lowest points right off the bat, and the only way left to go is up. We continue where the last chapter left off, and it explains that all of the work All Might put into stopping crime lowered the crime rate, and him just being there is now enough of a deterrent for most villains. He's been looking for someone to succeed him by taking on his own inherited power. One for all. The quirk to pass on power from one person to another. Midoriya can't believe it because he's never heard of a quirk like that before, explaining that science doesn't know much about them, but it's stopped when All Might reaffirms his belief in him. Side note, there's some nice foreshadowing in this panel. So, while Midoriya has the chance to live his dream, he needs to work out a bit to get his body ready for the power of One for All. or else his limbs will explode.
Kaboom!
To do so, he will be removing garbage from a beach's shoreline. Hero work is about volunteering, no matter how small it may be, and All Might sets up a laid out lifestyle regimen as well. All of this is also within the time limit of 10 months to get Midoriya ready for his high school entrance exams. As stated in chapter 1, he wants to apply for the top hero school in the nation, UA, which also happens to be his mentor's alma mater. So one training montage later, we find out that Midoriya is overworking himself in secret. All Might scolds him, but the boy's sight on the future beyond even the exams motivates his teacher to revise his plans. Keep note of this. After a grueling 10 months, Midoriya asserts his dominance over the cleaned up beach, and All Might shows him the proof of his growth. With the entrance exam just a few hours away, the top hero gives his protege one last task. He plucks a strand of hair from his head and tells him to eat this. The power is passed down through consuming DNA. Kinda hard to do with hair, you gotta dig real deep to get the DNA, gotta get like follicle deep, but for the sake of storytelling, I don't want to think of the other ways, so we'll let this one slide, right? After a quick run home, Midoriya makes his way to UA, ready to take his test. He's even noticed by a slightly more chilled out Bakugo. But with that out of the way, it's time for him to take his first steps towards his dream. Face first. Luckily for him, he's saved by a girl passing by. He even manages to stutter at her. Really coming out of his shell, this boy is. We cut to inside to get a rundown of the practical part of the exam. Grouped separately from the people you went to middle school with, you rack up points by destroying different robots, with a special one with 0 points just thrown in there to torment all of them. Midoriya's fanboying and worrying somehow gets him unwanted attention, but now equipped with the power of All Might, he can't do much at all. He may have ultimate power and the backing of the #1 pro, but 10 months of working out don't undo years of torment and an ingrained shrinking reflex. Too immobilized by fear, he can't rack up any points. And then the 0-pointer shows up. Everyone decides to move, but one person is stuck. It's the nice girl from before, and she's right in the way of the colossal robo. Without a second thought, the boy flies through the air, clenches his ass, and shouts the words from his heart. Smash! With one mighty blow, the robot is done for. And so are the boy's arms and legs. Luckily, before he becomes a splat on the floor, the girl manages to save him at the last second. But alas, he runs out of time and the test ends without him gaining any robo points. He goes home, hollowed and empty, and after a week of no communication with his master, he's almost given up all hope. But then a letter from UA arrives. He opens it to find not only All Might, but that nice girl trying to give him some of her points for saving her. However, that isn't needed. This test wasn't just awarding points for destroying robots, but also rescue points for helping your fellow test takers. He may have gotten 0 villain points, but with 60 rescue points, he's earned his spot into his hero academia. Alright, that's a wrap. Forget everything else. This video's over. I did it. This bit of story is really nice. Obviously, a test on villain and rescue points makes sense, but how the story demonstrates that the spirit of the hero is one of the most important aspects to everything. Sure, you need to be able to do, but the story points out the act of helping someone without any benefit of yourself being a main point. While not explicitly stated, it's pretty obvious that saving the girl along with taking out the 0-pointer robot are what topped him off at getting 7th in the practical exam itself. But just as importantly, it shows once again how acting can affect the people around you, just as Midoriya and the girl helped each other again and again. After a bit, All Might contacts him to congratulate him on his acceptance in person. Midoriya laments the fact that he can't use his new powers well, but All Might reassures him that with time and effort, he will build up his body enough to withstand a blowback, and also with time, All Might thinks to himself that his power will soon fade and disappear, seemingly proud that he was able to find such a great successor for himself. Spring comes and with it a new school year. Midoriya sets off to his first day of classes hoping he's not grouped up with some of the other more unsavory exam takers he met, but with 2 hero classes composed of 20 students each, 4 of which are recommended students, his odds of running into them are pretty good. But while Bakugo is still sulking, Ida Tenya, someone who really got on his case during the exams, has changed his opinion of him after realizing the rescue aspect of the test. That nice girl he met, Uraraka Ochako, is also in the same class as them. While the three of them try to catch up a little, Bakugo is just reminded on how he tried to push Midoriya around, only for the boy to stand up for himself for the first time in a while. The fun comes to a stop when their teacher arrives, and while he may seem like a husk of a person, their homeroom teacher, Aizawa Shota, is a man of rationality. Wasting no time at all, he takes the kids to the field. Quirk use is prohibited, so even in school their fitness tests are based on their natural abilities. So to get the kids into the right mindset, he's going to let them do their fitness tests using their quirks as best they can. But to also get them into the right hero mindset, he adds the stipulation that the person with the lowest score will be expelled. To rub it in a little more, we learn that he's expelled over 150 students before. As the children do their tests, we get to see some of their quirks in action. Super speed, removal of gravity, belly button laser. A lot of interesting people to meet, but on the other hand, Midoriya isn't doing too well himself. We flash back to a talk with All Might, and he comes up with a mental image for his power. An egg in a microwave. I guess that's a thing people do. Unrelated to this analysis, microwaved food just tends to taste like trash. Buy an air fryer. Anyway, like an egg in a microwave, he tries to not explode, but the fear of breaking his bones causes him to not even be able to power up at all. Out of options and reaching the last test where his quirk would even be useful, he goes for broke with the ball toss, but he seems to misfire once more. Or so he thinks. It seems his teacher was keeping an eye out on him and decided that this time breaking his arms wasn't going to fly, so he decided to erase his quirk. Every teacher at UA is a pro hero, and their homeroom teacher is the erasure hero, Eraserhead. He tells Midoriya that he can't go around being reckless and inconveniencing others and expecting someone to save him like in the exam, and telling him that he can't be a hero with that type of power. He gives the boy his quirk back and tells him to try again, but thinks to himself that if he goes for broke once more, or if he doesn't even try at all, he's still going to fail. So Midoriya, being the protagonist that he is, takes his teacher's words to heart and uses his power just enough to scuff one of his fingers. Bakugo, finally having it set in on how Midoriya even managed to get into school, gets enraged and tries to get to the bottom of it all, but we don't have time for that. He can only be left to stew in his own preconceived notions. As everything wraps up, we find out that Aizawa was lying about kicking out the lowest scored student, a rational ruse to get them all to try their best. And while some of the kids buy that, All Might doesn't, citing that he expelled an entire class last year, saying that he too sees Midoriya's potential. Aizawa just states that he himself is only so hard on them because if they aren't serious and if their dreams were cut short, that would be crueler than having them quit outright. After getting healed up by UA's own pro hero nurse Recovery Girl, Midoriya makes his way home, running into both Ida and Ochako, who confuses Bakugo's insulting nickname Deku for Midoriya's first name. Let's have fun with language for a bit. So, young Bakugo, being the little turd that he is, decided to use an alternate reading of Izuku's name to make fun of him. Deku being shortened from the phrase Deku no Bo, someone useless, a good for nothing, literally like a wooden doll, right? Think a Deku scrub, where are my gamers at? To thematically rub it in, it's a phrase that Aizawa uses when calling Izuku out on his talk during the ball toss. But that's a phonetic insult. To really dive into it, we have to use the child's own words. Nani mo dekine, can't do anything. But as Uraraka explains to her, Deku gives off a gambare, you can do it kind of feeling, probably stemming from the word dekiru, can do. The same wrong reading but a different interpretation. The ending modifier being the difference, ne as in can't and ru as in can. And to be even cuter about it, shortening it down into a compliment for Deku is super easy to imagine as a childish nickname. Japan's full of so many puns because not just their language, but their entire writing structure just leans into it super hard. Also, we reached the part of the video where I'll just be calling Midoriya Deku from now on. Actually recapping what just happened, this bit's pretty standard for most normal shonen series. Starting out, you have to impress your new super strict teacher who is also super doting at the same time, but don't let the kids find out that last bit though. I think my favorite part about this is that, at least in the manga, Aizawa explains that he lied before we even see the results. It shows how they don't matter and the thing being assessed were the kids' ingenuity, adaptability, and mindsets. It does double down again on the reveal that he expelled an entire class last year, but he does have his reasons. But seeing how Izuku does manage to take another step forward, his teaching method seems to have some merit. The day passes, and after some normal high school classes, their second day of hero training is helmed by All Might himself. It's time for the kids to suit up and head to one of the examination blocks for battle training. We learn about how heroes get their costumes and how quirk registration works. After you're registered, you can make some changes once or twice if you find out a truer aspect of your quirk. And with this registration form and some personal requests, they send these papers off to support agencies, and that's how their suits gets made. Special agencies work with the school themselves for the children's sake. Deku, on the other hand, gets surprised by his mother, who's always felt a little guilty about not believing in his dream. To show her newfound support, she finds his notes and decides to make a hero costume herself, and Deku wears it with pride, even if it is a little obvious. The kids are put into pairs and then they are split between heroes and villains. The objective for our hero team is to search indoors for a bomb that the villain team is protecting. Our heroes just need to touch the bomb to win, but the villains can move it around at their own discretion. If anyone is incapacitated by binding tape, they are out for that round. The first round is between our villains Bakugo and Ida, and our heroes Deku and Uraraka. Bakugo is raring to go at his childhood friend, while Deku is nervous but also determined about their encounter. He's able to do one thing most people, even in real life, aren't able to do, and that is detach a person's ability from their character. I mean that both positively and negatively. With our two teams ready and the rest of the class watching in the wings, the match starts and Bakugo comes out swinging right out of the gate, but Deku is the one who is able to land the first good hit of the match, claiming that Deku no longer stands for useless, but for the Deku that's doing his best. Ochako runs off ahead while Deku uses his vast knowledge of heroes and the boy himself to fend off Bakugo as best he can without using his quirk. However, it seems this battle is stirring up both of the boys' memories of their childhood. Even younger Deku noticed when Bakugo started becoming the trash bag that he is today, and we learn how Bakugo got his brash mentality in the first place. Thinking highly of yourself is one thing, but looking down on others at the same time is a bad combination. If those two extremes ever cross, you will be hit by an instant existential crisis. So it seems these two had more in common in their childhoods than either are aware. Up above, Uraraka and Ida are having a back and forth over the bomb, but down below, Bakugo is going a bit more than all out. Blowing out a part of the building itself, All Might gives him a warning not to do it again, and the fight turns into an all-out brawl where Bakugo has the advantage now that he's a bit more focused and Deku has nowhere to run. But Deku isn't out of options just yet. He checks his location with Uraraka and charges forth, declaring that the reason he's trying so hard is because of how amazing Bakugo is. The two clash, but while Bakugo is just thinking about dropping his opponent, Deku is thinking about winning the exercise and aims a smash upward to give Uraraka a chance to reach the bomb and for the two of them to win. Bakugo realizes that if Deku decided to punch him, he'd be a splat on the wall, and starts having that existential crisis I brought up before. But All Might comes in and rounds up everyone for their evaluations. All Might gives Ida the VIP. VIP? Everyone makes mistakes. He awards Ida MVP for being the one to adapt most to the lesson. The one who came out the worst is obviously Bakugo, who acted out of spite. Something everyone could clearly tell even without audio that only All Might had. We run through a few more drills to see what some of the other kids can do, but after class All Might makes a beeline to the infirmary to be scolded by Recovery Girl for having Deku sent to her office and being patched up 3 times already. He admits to indulging in the boy, but we also find out a bit more on who knows his secret and how much they know about it. After waking up and catching up with his classmates, Deku runs off to find Bakugo and tries his best to explain that he wasn't trying to trick him about his quirk, but just kinda leans into saying that he'll beat him one day for real. Bakugo has no idea what he's talking about, but accepts that today was his loss and that he's more aware of the people around him, using Yaoyorozu, the girl who criticized his performance, and Todoroki as a standout student in the exercise as examples. From here on out, he's going to beat every last one of them. And with this bit over, the story finally has a good amount of meat on its bones. Don't get me wrong, I think it did a good job of establishing itself, its world, and its characters. It had a strong identity, but it didn't have something to really make it stand out. Deku and Bakugo's relationship is truly something special. Bakugo doesn't want to acknowledge Deku as anything at all, but the boy's striving cracks his entire worldview. What I really enjoy is the look into Bakugo's thought process. It didn't just start with him thinking he was the best, but legitimately wondering why others couldn't do what he could. By himself, he realized that he was better than average, and Deku, who could hardly keep up, was set lower than everyone else. But even as a child, he could feel what Deku lacked in practical skill he made up for with his kindness and spirit, but he didn't know how to comprehend that, so it morphed into this idea of him being looked down on, because Deku didn't know where he or himself stood in his own mind. I feel that it's pretty rare, but this is one of the few times where someone uses the term childhood friends and means that as friends during childhood. You'll probably see that a lot in harem rom-coms when they want to add in a new girl, but for these two they have the caveat of still being physically close since then as well. Deku's side of things is pretty straightforward and simple because he's not the one with the problem. We already know that he's not afraid to stand up to Bakugo, and when forced into confrontation, he'll even go as far as trying to fight him without using his quirk, really reinforcing the fact that not having a quirk was the only thing holding him back, and now that he has one, his own potential physically and mentally get to bloom. Deku is a big enough person to see Bakugo for all of his pros and his cons, and because of that, winning has more meaning than just standing up to his bully. He can achieve as much as he wants, but his own confidence is still low, and overcoming a tall wall that he is able to comprehend proves that he has motivation not just for his dream, but for himself as a person. It's why All Might hesitates to stop the match in the first place. Bakugo is obviously the one who will get the most out of this relationship, but for Deku it's more about expressing himself and dealing with the responsibilities of his quirk and being honest about it. Bakugo feels tricked when that isn't the case, but Deku can't really talk about that, and he can't really express himself about how he feels about Bakugo because Bakugo can't express himself about how he really feels about Deku. It works both ways. As the two boys look on to their future classes, evil seems to be scheming within the shadows. The next day, it seems that All Might's teaching at the school has finally gotten out and reporters swarm the campus, but they are blocked by the UA barrier, a really fancy lock. Inside, the students get a few words from Aizawa, who tells them that they have to choose their class president, normally a bothersome task manager, but in a hero school, the sense of leadership is exponential. Ida proposes that they all take a vote, but the class objects, saying that wouldn't they all vote for themselves? Realistically, most of them did, but somehow Deku managed to get 3 votes. Someone also got 2 votes, so weird. Our green bean is now officially the class president. We skip to lunch and we find out a bit more about the school and our characters. UA isn't just a hero school, it has a support and business courses, but more importantly we find out that Ida is the son of a hero family. His older brother, Ingenium, works in Tokyo with 65 sidekicks. The straight-laced boy gets uncharacteristically excited, and it's a cute little scene between Deku, Ochako, and Ida. But alas, an intruder bell rings, getting all the students in a fuss. Makes sense seeing how most of them aren't aspiring heroes. Ida, being shoved towards the window, gets a good view on what's going on. The press seems to have made their way inside. With a little help from Uraraka and inspiration from Deku and his brother, he gets everyone to calm down. Being impressed with the boys' decisive actions, back in class, Deku decides that Ida should take the role of class president, and everyone agrees. However, outside, the teachers look over the break-in and suspect that villainy is afoot. It's not super apparent yet, but this is the general mood that this story runs on. You have a strong action scene, and then you have a little cooldown chapter where you get to know the characters and they get to have a bit more fun. You get thrusted back into a status quo and everything starts to feel a bit more normal again, so when things do change, it's a bit more dramatic. But we're still doing normal school activities, we haven't hit the full rotation quite yet. It's another day once again, and en route to school, a villain seems to have taken a family hostage, but unluckily for him, All Might is here. I want to stop for a second and just really look at this prick. Like, what an absolute nobbin, a real dickhead this guy is. He looks like a penis. Anyhow, as All Might can't help but run himself ragged, he's thinking over his conversation with Deku the other day. He never expected the boy to blab about their secret, but luckily for them, Bakugo didn't understand what was going on. He's reminded that he's teaching a 15-year-old boy, and I also would like you all to remember that he's teaching a 15-year-old boy. But once again, he reiterates that the secret getting out would be catastrophic, not just to the boy, but to society at large. Back at school, the kids get informed on their next exercise, rescue. They get suited up, and on the bus ride over we get a nice little look on how they're all getting to know each other. Tsuyu starts off first, saying that Deku's power reminds her a bit of All Might's, but luckily for him he can't handle it, so no one is none the wiser of his predicament, but they all share their own ideas on how their quirks are viewed for their hero work. How strong they are, or how flashy they might be. The others bring up Bakugo for obvious reasons, but conclude that he could never be popular with his personality, and both he and Deku are amazed at these kids' bluntness. The kids arrive and they're welcomed by the Space Hero 13. It's such a good design, I really like 13. And they are welcomed to the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, USJ. All Might was supposed to meet them there, but he pushed himself a little too hard that morning. 13 starts off with a speech reminding the children that their quirks can be dangerous. That's why Aizawa had them do their fitness test to test out the limits, why All Might had them do battle to test their limits against other people. And now it's time to do rescue and learn how to use those deadly abilities to save someone else's life. The kids are excited to start their next lesson, but they get abruptly interrupted by this weird swirling vortex at the bottom of the stairs, and an even weirder person coming out of it. Villains have encroached their lesson, and it seems they have a bone to pick with All Might. Their mission is to kill the symbol of peace. Our protagonists surmise that this can't be some special happenstance, and Aizawa tells 13 to protect the kids and leave as he jumps headfirst into the fray. Clearly at a disadvantage, he still manages to take out a few of them at a time. Even one of his weaknesses gets found out. He can't erase heteromorphic quirks, natural physical augmentations, like an extra limb, but he's trained for such situations. However, in a blink of an eye, the mist-like man manages to head off the kids in 13. He introduces their group as the League of Villains, and just as 13 is about to attack, Bakugo and Kirishima get in their way. That is more than enough time for the mist-like man to send some of our heroes to different points in the building. Deku gets whisked off to the flood zone, and just before he gets chomped, he's saved by Tsuyu, who managed to find fellow student Mineta. They take refuge on a boat, and they try to figure out what's going on. They guess that the reason the barrier was torn down yesterday was so that someone could get the class schedule, and the only reason the villains are even here is because they actually found a way to kill All Might. The kids are quickly surrounded by a large group of villains while they try to gather themselves, but Mineta can't take it. Deku, on the other hand, tries to understand their reasoning for wanting to kill All Might, but it's something that he can't even comprehend from his perspective. There is only one option for all of the students right now, and that is to fight for their lives. The next chapter starts off by catching us up with All Might, who can't make contact with anyone in USJ, and he can't leave because the principal has cornered him. 3 pages of irony just slowly stabbing into you. It's great. Back at USJ, it seems the Black Mist missed a few of the students at 13, and luckily Ida was one of them. They plan to have him run back to get help. Back at the flood zone, the 3 still try to think through their situation. They surmise that the fact that Tsuyu was sent to an area full of water means that the villains don't know what the children's quirks are, and that they have to use that to their advantage. While a little obvious, we learn about Tsuyu's frog quirk. She can do everything a frog can. We already know enough about Deku. And Mineta has sticky balls that pop off of his head and stick to surfaces. If he's feeling well, they can stick for about a day, and they also repel against him, bouncing right off of his touch. As the boy has a reasonable breakdown, the boat gets cleaved in half to speed up their deaths. Mineta freaks out even more, and Tsuyu asks why he even wanted to be a hero in the first place, but he rightfully calls out that the other 2 not being scared is kinda weird, seeing how they were just middle schoolers a month ago. It's their 5th day? 4th day? 5th day? It's one of their F days of classes and it's already life or death? Seeing as how they're now running out of time, Deku has to make a move. Trembling himself, he gathers his courage and imitates Bakugo and jumps out to the enemy. Minimizing the damage to himself and maximizing the effect, he flicks his fingers directly downward, causing a vacuum in the water. Feeling inspired, Mineta does his best and starts tossing his balls into the water as Tsuyu sails over. When the water converges back into itself, all of the villains are rounded up and captured with the 3's escape. They manage to make it back to the plaza area, but instead of moving to the side to get to the others, they let their tiny victory get to their heads and wait for their chance to support their sensei. We cut to the other children who seem to be faring pretty well. If Erasure shows us how someone can overcome quirk disadvantage with training, this shows us how low level these thugs actually are if they can't beat a couple of kids who are outnumbered. The teachers on the other hand are starting to get overwhelmed, Aizawa by the odds and 13 by their lack of fighting experience. And now they bring out their anti-All Might weapon, Nomu. We cut over to Bakugo and Kirishima, who managed to do pretty well for themselves. Kirishima is worried about the others, but Bakugo is more focused on taking out their warp gate, possibly feeling bad about his earlier screw up, but tactically because if they cut off their exit, then the villains have nowhere to run. He also surmises that the rest of the class should be fine dealing with these random low-level thugs. Back at the exit, Ida is trying to make his way out, and with the help of the other students, he manages to reach his goal. The warp gate makes his way back to his boss, Shigaraki Tomura, and tells them that they've run out of time. Game over. Shigaraki decides that he should leave the symbol of peace a little gift of a dead child, but Eraser manages to get one last glare in to ruin his plans. Deku also tries to help and manages to land a clean hit without breaking his arm. But it was against the big guy, and nothing happened? Kinda odd for a kid that can blow away a giant robot. Things are looking pretty bad, but thankfully All Might arrives at the nick of time and the bad guys get themselves a continue. Managing to escape the principal and running into Ida on the way here, the symbol of peace is beyond mad and he can't even smile. Only after saving the others in the plaza can he wear his signature grin again. Deku gives All Might a warning, and even after taking it to heart, the weird monster doesn't budge even after taking clean hits on his exposed brain. Shigaraki gets over his speed check and picks up his dropped hand, calling it father. Creep. He starts saying some nonsense about violence, but more importantly, he knows that All Might has been getting weaker. This mindless beast, this Nomu, was made to fight a weakening All Might with the quirk of shock absorption. Like any civilized person, he plans to solve this problem with a backdrop, but the warp gate seems to have gotten in his way and now they have the upper hand on our hero. Deku, fully understanding the danger, rushes back to help his mentor, but before he can get diced up by the warp gate, Bakugo manages to make good on his promise and holds the missed man down by his body plate. Todoroki then comes in and freezes half of the Nomu holding All Might in place, and Kirishima, he does his best. He's got spirit. Clap for the boy. With all of this assistance, All Might can now break free, but it seems being frozen over and falling apart isn't enough to stop the Nomu. Not only shock absorption, but hyper regeneration is another quirk it has. After everyone has managed to separate themselves, Shigaraki goes off once again on some tangent about the circle of violence, but All Might calls his bluff, essentially saying the man's just a dickhead enjoying the chaos. The symbol of peace is done messing around and he's ready to pull out all of the stops. His rush stops both the villains and the children, and it's a one-on-one brawl between him and the Nomu. And just like something straight out of a comic book, All Might practically beats the shock absorption out of him, both overcoming his and the Nomu's limits. Sarani Mukoe plus Ultra. With his time now up, the only thing All Might can do is bluff. It's not looking good for him and some of the other students. Shigaraki is about to have a heated gamer moment, but Kurogiri manages to calm him down enough to get him to try one more time. Once again, Deku is the only one who understands, and he goes to help, but warp gate's real strong if you don't hit the body. But by the power of storytelling and a gun, the day is saved. The other teachers have arrived in time. It's truly game over for our villains. Sadly, the two masterminds escape and are free to try again another day. Deku feels ashamed that he couldn't do anything, but All Might affirms him that if he hadn't have jumped out, he would have died. Deku managed to save his hero once again. As the teachers fetch up the other children, we swap over to the villain's hideout. Shigaraki complains to his teacher, his master, how he was lied to about All Might being weaker. It wasn't a lie, but they were too impatient for their efforts. The only thing that catches the interest of the person behind the monitor is the mention of someone who was as fast as All Might. Love this contemplative panel of that computer monitor. It's thinking real hard. His master tells him that the only thing he can do is to gather stronger troops and to try again, for Shigaraki is the symbol villains have been waiting for. Back at USJ, the police rounded up all the kids, and aside from Deku and the teachers, no one in the class got hurt. Aizawa is in rough shape, but nothing life-threatening, and 13 is doing better than that. Deku and All Might were sent to Recovery Girl, and they're visited by the detective, Tsukauchi, who is someone to be trusted with sacred secrets. The detective compliments the heroes there, but All Might also compliments the kids who had their lives put on the line and came out on top. A day is passed by with cancelled classes, but it's soon back to school for the kids and surprisingly their homeroom teacher. 2 broken arms and a smashed up face isn't enough to keep him down. He has to make sure the kids are prepared for their next battle, the school sports festival. And it's finally at the end that we've gotten real serious in this story, haven't we? What I find so interesting about this part is how it plays with the idea of this story's power balance and sets up its scaling. In this world, the mindset that a more powerful quirk will generally prevail even if outnumbered are in an advantageous situation. This arc plays with the idea of matchups but falls back into that mindset with a large caveat. You start off with the Racerhead who jumps into the fray in a way that he's not used to and is clearly outnumbered, but with training he manages to take most of them out. Then you have someone like Todoroki who one-shots everyone with his powerful quirk. Bakugo and Kirishima who seems to have taken longer, but it wasn't too much trouble for them in the end. No real advantage, but it shows off the innate skill of the students in basic combat, at least the ones with more offensive-like abilities. But then you have the teams that rely on their synergy than their raw skill or power. The group at the exit, Yaoyorozu's and Deku's group. Deku comes up with a plan on his own and hopes that the other 2 can figure out the rest for themselves because they get interrupted. On his own, it's a pretty fine plan, but because they're all together, they're able to make a clean escape. The same can be said for the group at the exit who uses teamwork and their gained knowledge from past actions. Next you have Yaoyorozu's group, which is a mixture of everything because not everyone would be able to block Kaminari's unfocused lightning, such as Jiro, but Yaoyorozu is also able to cover for the both of them as well, letting Kaminari's powerful quirk do all of the work, much like Todoroki. However, these 3 are unlucky because of the villain's own ingenuity in their own quirk compatibility, something Deku makes mentions of in his escape. But back to that caveat, Eraser naturally gets beaten down by the odds. His limit is reached and the enemy is aware of it, but he's finished off by the modified Nomu, a creature that laughs in the face of our established story by having multiple quirks. Sure, some characters have a combination of quirks from their parents, like Todoroki or Bakugo, one of those being a plot point later, but this guy has 2 separate abilities. So at this point of the story, the only person that can handle him is All Might, but All Might is the bigger caveat of the 2 who just hits him hard enough that he doesn't matter anymore. Both of these characters break the established rules at face value with nothing more than the fact that they exist, and they prop each other up because if one can exist, you can suspend your belief that the other one can as well. We also get introduced to our main villains of the plot, Shigaraki Tomura, Kurogiri, and whoever that man behind the monitor really is. There's not much to go on other than his fake speech about violence and video game references. But there is something to be said about a character who uses the world's view about good and evil just to do wrong. In this world, heroes and villains aren't just ideas, but labels, and to see someone so earnestly act within that label is refreshing, just as these kids act within the label of being a hero. It's a very nice contrast. And to finally wrap up the last bit on this arc, I like to reiterate that these kids went through a lot and it's one of their F days of class already. One of my favorite things about this series is that it tends to be as fast or as slow as it wants to be. You know, when people aren't sick and moving and just being stressed out by the overall work ethic of manga artists in Japan, it's pretty fast. So strap in, we're about to hit some Mach speeds in a bit. But now on to some overall critiques. This series is pretty simple, wears its themes on its skin. What does it mean to be a hero, to save someone? But what I think I enjoy the most is that there's always someone around to criticize it a little bit. Like how the kids criticize Bakugo's mentality and personality in his fights, or how Aizawa criticizes Deku and All Might's reckless behavior, but he double downs on the boy's skill to live up to that behavior. And it really does go out of its way to bring up the ability aspect. And it's fair when you bring in the concept of saving other people. You know, the whole idea of someone who can't swim has no business saving someone else who's drowning. In the original one-shot, Midoriya was a businessman selling hero items, and because of that he was able to try to be a hero himself, but he couldn't do it because he just wasn't able to live up to that ability. But he did manage to save someone in his own right and help save the day. Here we quickly have a world that tells us if you don't have a power, you're not doing anything. Hell, even if you do have a power, there might not be much you can do anyway. But that's just on the terms of fighting. The spirit that the boy has and the spirit that the original Midoriya has is still intact, and that is still the driving force of this entire narrative. But speaking of fighting, let's talk about the quirks themselves just a little bit. He's created a world where everyone has a weird power, and our main protagonist is able to be super strong. Grapes popping out of people's heads, engines coming out of people's legs, flashy explosions, removal of gravity, it's crazy. But even now he's shown that people have situations that they aren't particularly good with. Groups, environments, time, you name it. And at least for this part of the story, Deku being here shows us that these characters have more room to grow. But what most of these quirks really do is necessitate the reason that we all came here, right? You know, the battles. I'm a big fan of Horikoshi's art style, very dynamic, very thick, it's sharp when it needs to be and round when it needs to be, so I really like all of his posing and action shots. But I'm no art critic, so you know, I don't know what I'm talking about. I see things and they're pretty easy to comprehend. Stop reading on your phones, you weirdos. So let's move over to something that I can critique. What do you guys think a clever battle is? Obviously everyone has their own preferences, but in my opinion, I'd say My Hero Academia is a little clever, but relies mostly on emotions for ending big fights. Ha, original line, I know, I'm a genius, but I feel like people undermine the cleverness this series still employs to this day. Let's go back to Bakugo vs Deku. Deku reads Bakugo like a book at page 1 and you can call that clever, but acts like that need a bit of setup to make them feel more meaningful, or it just gains a you're just too slow kind of feel to it, you know? It's then backed up by Bakugo realizing that he's being read and throwing out a feint when he does his little hopover move. That move puts both of our characters on the same playing field. But unlike Deku, Bakugo gets so heated that he forgets, and Deku, while still reading his opponent, comes up with a plan to win the overall practice. All of that together reinforces the strategies and cleverness of our main character. I think that takes the cake out of all the chapters I grouped up, but even something as simple as All Might rushing down Nomu can count as how he manages to keep everyone in place and protect the kids from the villains. Let's move on to world building. Did you guys know that world building is more than just talking about places that exist in the work of fiction? And I know that most of you know, but can you accept that we're not leaving Japan? Spoiler alert. The world of My Hero Academia is the same as ours, but people have superpowers now, so the focus isn't on places in the world, but the people that live in it. My Hero excels at creating a society, and this part of the story does a lot of groundwork for the things to come. We have a strong base of normalcy in a society where villainy is seen more as an annoyance than a real threat. People are heroes for a multitude of different reasons, and starting from a school level, it's super competitive. But hey man, in a world like this with crazy monsters running around, racism's probably people are probably extra racist. Anyway, these kids probably live in the good part of Japan. Status quo is set. It's pretty neat, it's nice, we have a good primer, but even that little primer is constantly being pushed with things like the sludge villain, UA being broken into, the USJ attack. We're getting there. But you know, while fighting and drawing and maybe animation if you're watching the anime, that may have gotten you hooked, but we know the reason why people stay, and that is the characters. My Hero Academia, people growing into the heroes of tomorrow. But with heroes being an actual profession, what does that mean for the world? Well, they're like super cops, they work for the government, and they're allowed to use their powers to fight crime, unlike the normal cops. We get a bit of insight into their mentality, like All Might who does his best to try and help everyone whenever he gets the chance, to some heroes who are a bit more materialistic and trying to one-up each other, or maybe it's Ayazawa who wants to be left alone and just wants to do his job. But either way, you can still tell that all of these people genuinely want to help others, and they're all doing their best. On a more thematic level, we see heroics from its most basic form to its most bombastic, from just trying your best to help someone, from keeping them from falling down, to blasting the bad guy into the skyline. They are all presented as being just as meaningful as each other, but more than that, it's the connections you make by caring for other people that prevails over everything else. Because you moved when no one else would. Because he saved me. You know, basic overarching mentality of our characters. On a way more specific note, Deku is 100% the heart of this story on a thematic level, and it's up to All Might to bring home with the bombastic notes. It's been a little over 2 volumes, and Deku has grown quite a lot. Getting a quirk really brought him out of his shell. He stands up to Bakugo when it really matters, but what's kind of odd is he's strangely calm in a life or death situation. He's sitting somewhere between the stone-faced Tsuyu and the blubbering Mineta, but he focuses on the situation calmly and thinks up a plan to get them all out of there. A complete opposite to his character in class-based trials or even social situations. It seems years of bullying can hold people back. Bakugo is about getting over his own mental lines in the sand. His character arc might not be as predictable yet, because, you know, anything could happen. This is a facade, we all know what's gonna happen. But he has shown that he is willing to back off and listen to other people if they prove themselves to him. He went from bullying Deku to leaving him alone the best he could, and at the very end looking the boy in the eye. We clearly know who that line in the sand is. All Might starts off as this legend who's only spoken of, seen in video, and when you finally see him for the first time, you're like, wow, he really is that great. And then in like 5 pages, the facade shatters completely. But he also puts his money where his mouth is, and directs all of that heroism and enthusiasm into Deku. The boy reminded him on what it means to be a hero, and he seems so pleased with himself that he chose Midoriya at every turn, and it's super endearing. The fact that it isn't some higher power and just another person choosing someone else to hold this grand responsibility makes their relationship a bit more special, also a bit more complicated. He's worried about his time running out, but he seems content with the one he chose to carry on his will, and he constantly reminds you why he's called the symbol of peace. Not talking about the villains, we don't really have enough on them, and as much as we do, you can already tell they're pretty cracked. As for everyone else, we have a few characters that got to stand out like Ochako and Ida, but obviously within a school setting, we have a rather large cast of characters with Class 1A, and that's not even counting the other teachers, the other heroes, those villains I don't want to talk about, and that's just part 1. The story isn't worried about taking its time introducing us to the characters as it doles them out just a bit at a time with each of these school-focused arcs. So when coming in, you have to understand that this series has a rotating door of characters that it's constantly throwing in your face, and some of them might matter more than others, and you have to deal with that with an overall faster pace of storytelling. I say that in terms of internal and external storytelling. By internal, I mean that the kids have been in school for like 4 or 5 days, and their lives are already on the line. And by external, I mean that overall arcs don't take as long as other shonen series. But that's just my opinion. Combine that with a way more consistent plot structure that we're going to run up into, it just feels so quick-paced to me. But I'm also comparing it to the contemporaries that it's taking over. I don't know anything about, like, now, right? Like, Dr. Stone was kind of fast, I guess, but that's not like a bottle manga, right? I didn't read Demon Slayer, I don't know about that. Like, it ended really quickly, but like, that doesn't tell me how it's paced. But that quick pace mentality might also be helped by the fact that this manga will just stuff a bunch of things into a chapter at a time. Small details and jokes in each panel, it's very full, but it is to a speed and fullness that I enjoy. And I think that's about it for this overly long video. Alright, I did it. Look, the only reason that I really started this is because 1, I do want to talk about My Hero Academia, I really enjoy it. 2, I just want better conversations. I feel like the current conversation is about what hasn't happened, and it's overlooking everything that we've been through to get this far. I'm all for wanting more, but not at the cost of dismissing what's currently going on, not for overlooking the context for why things are happening and who's doing what. I won't persecute most people on what they dislike or like about most things. I'll judge you, but that's completely unrelated. But an opinion is something more than that. It's based on the context of the story we are given, and when you dismiss bits that you don't care for, only bring up the ones that you want, or forget completely, it becomes poor criticism. For me, when it comes to critiquing a work, I think context is the most important thing. It helps me find reason in the actions taken and the words spoken, and why certain story beats are happening or why they might have been delayed. I've said so at the start of this series, but I'm over being strung along by plot threads or empty mysteries, and I'm worried that my own sense of wonder and surprise is a bit off. I feel like I'm having this disconnect because I might not be seeing something within the story's presentation because of my own personal values. To be perfectly honest, My Hero Academia isn't that cool of a series. It's campy, sappy, and full of cheese. A lot of characters aren't defined by big action pieces, but small character moments that would leave an action-focused fan wanting more. People could say that's bad and unsatisfying, but it's why I enjoyed myself as much as I have. They fail, they lose, they're broken, but it's their spirit to try, to continue to move forward that matters the most, to care about someone other than themselves. So that's all I'm asking for, to look beyond what you want and at what's actually in front of you. But that's just my opinion. I'm not here to change your mind, but to give you context and try to help you see things from my perspective. As long as you can get that first half down, I'm fine, and if you get the second, that's even better. Up next is the sports festival, and after that, depending on how hard I want to push it, there's either a really good ending there, or a really awkward starting point even later. Either way, I'd like to thank you if you've made it this far. And until we meet again, mata ao, until we meet again.